galaxy, silence was seen as weakness. But when an unknown enemy fleet appears on the edge of space and chaos erupts, one quiet human cadet stands up. No weapons, no orders, just calm precision. What happens? Next will challenge everything they thought they knew about strength, strategy, and survival. This is the story of how silence became the galaxy's loudest answer. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Let's move toward wonderful story. Naira Solon sat quietly at the back of lecture room 6D, her hands folded neatly on the desk in front of her. While the other students floated, glowed, buzzed, or shifted in color, she simply sat. The chair was too wide for her and made of a strange, rubbery material that stuck slightly to her uniform, but she didn't shift or complain. It wasn't the worst thing she'd experienced. Far from it. The Nova Sector Intergalactic Academy was a marvel of technology and diplomacy, a neutral zone where young beings from across 14 star systems came to learn the peaceful ways of the future. The Academy's towers stretched into the blue-lit skies of Station Orion, each structure humming with quiet energy, alive with the knowledge of thousands of worlds. But despite its beauty, the Academy had not been built with humans in mind. Professor Corlin, a tall creature with 6 eyes and 3 arms, stood at the front of the class. His skin shimmered like polished stone, and his voice came through a translator fixed to the collar of his robe. He enjoyed the sound of his own lectures more than the students did. Today's lesson was about the history of war, or more accurately, the slow end of it. As you can see, Corlin said, pointing to a large hologram, the early species relied on direct physical combat. These methods, while fascinating in a historical sense, are entirely outdated. The hologram displayed images of beings charging at each other with metal sticks and shields. Laughter erupted from the students. A cluster of balloon-like floaters bounced in amusement. A glowing gas being made a high-pitched warble, which was probably its version of giggling. A furry quadruped tapped its tail rhythmically, a polite sign of approval. Notice the humans here, Corlin continued, zooming in on a video of Earth soldiers training. Even after discovering energy-based weapons, they continued to rely on strategies involving loud noises and personal risk. This fascination with explosions and confrontation is why humans remain a curious anomaly. All eyes, compound, crystal, reflective, and shifting, turned to the back of the room. Naira didn't flinch. She kept her face neutral, her expression unreadable. It was a look that many at the Academy had tried and failed to interpret. Some called it arrogance, others suspected deep wisdom. The truth was, Naira had simply learned to listen more than speak. Earth had taught her that. A soft voice spoke up from the second row. "Why do they still use their fists?" asked Veek, a pink floating jelly-like student. "Can't they just sing their way through problems like we do?" "Humans evolved under different pressures," Corlin replied with a slight tilt of his upper head. "Extreme climates, dangerous wildlife, internal conflict. It is little surprise they adopted such aggressive habits. But rest assured, those ways are no longer considered acceptable in modern society." In the far corner, Lenka, a thin insectoid student with glimmering wings, glanced over at Naira. She had been watching the human since day one, drawn not by fear but by something else. Naira's silence was not the silence of someone who had nothing to say. It was the silence of someone who understood exactly when not to speak. And yet, Corlin added with a smirk, the Academy's council saw fit to admit one of them. The room shifted again. A low hum of amusement passed through the crowd. Another glance back. Naira's fingers moved, just once, tapping the table in a slow, steady rhythm. It was enough to make Veek wobble nervously. The screen behind the professor changed again, now showing statistics and a photo of Naira Solon. Her expression in the image was exactly the same as the one she wore now. Cold, calm, unreadable. Category 9.4, Corlin read aloud. That's nearly a Deathworlder classification. A species so adapted to danger, their daily survival is what most would call military training. And yet, here she is, studying ethics, strategy, and diplomacy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. A student from a planet known for war sitting in a classroom designed to eliminate the very need for it. Just then, a low alarm began to echo through the walls. At first, most students ignored it. The academy often tested its systems. But then, the walls turned red and the voice of the station's AI cut through the room. Warning, hostile fleet approaching. This is not a drill. Chaos erupted almost instantly. The lights flickered. The floating students panicked and began drifting toward the exit. The crystalline ones vibrated rapidly, flashing blue and red. One student vanished into a cloud of mist, clearly trying to escape the scene altogether. Corlin's translator crackled with panic. This must be a malfunction. The accords have not been broken. But the alert repeated. Warning. Enemy ships within range. All staff and students proceed to evacuation routes immediately. In the middle of this growing panic, Naira Solon stood, slowly, silently. She walked to the window, looking out at the vast starscape. Dark shadows moved across the distant light. Ships, dozens of them. No drills. No warning. She turned to face the room. For the first time in over 4 months, she opened her mouth. You may want to take notes, she said calmly, her voice clear and steady, because class is about to get real. And in that moment, even the loudest students fell quiet. Alarm lights continued to flash across the ceilings of Nova Sector Academy, turning every hallway red and orange like the inside of a slow-burning fire. Students pushed and floated in every direction, their bodies reacting to fear in ways as different as their shapes. Some glowed, some vibrated, and one let out a misty cloud that left the corridor slippery and hard to see through. No one had expected a real attack. The academy was meant to be safe, a symbol of unity among stars. That illusion had just shattered. Naira Solon moved calmly through the crowd. She wasn't shouting or waving. She didn't need to. Her stillness drew attention on its own. While other students bumped into walls and tried to understand evacuation maps, Naira walked in a straight line toward the central command hallway. Her pace was steady, her face calm. Those who had laughed at her hours earlier now moved out of her way without realizing why. Security Chief Holtron arrived outside Lecture Room 6D just as Naira was leaving it. He was large, green-scaled, and sweating through his uniform. His species, the Graxil, were known for strength, not planning. Why is everyone still here? He barked, his deep voice rattling panels. The shelters aren't even halfway full. Professor Corlin ran toward him, waving 3 arms. You don't understand. This fleet, it shouldn't be here. The Accord of Outer Harmony guarantees peace. This is a violation of galactic law. Chief Holtron gave him a look full of teeth. They're not here to talk about treaties, Professor. They're here to fire weapons. Do you have any plan that involves moving faster than panic? Naira stepped between them before Corlin could reply. Where are the defense staff? She asked. Her voice was calm, as if she were asking for directions in a quiet library. The defense staff? Holtron repeated. They haven't trained for this in decades. Most of them are scientists or diplomats. We have emergency shields, but no one remembers how to activate half of them. Then we use what works, she said, already moving. Again. Behind her, Lenka, the insectoid student who had noticed Naira's silence before anyone else, followed. You know what to do? She asked, her wings trembling slightly. I've trained for this, Naira replied without slowing down. And not just with screens and books. They entered Corridor 5H, one of the main access tunnels that led toward the Academy's old war simulation rooms. Most students thought of them as history labs. But Earth cadets, at least the ones Naira had studied with before she came here, used them for real-world drills. She doubted the other species had ever truly practiced under fire. Behind her, a few students had begun to follow. Veek, the floating pink blob who had mocked humans only hours ago, drifted just behind Lenka, his glow dimmed to a pale hue of nervousness. A tall silver android named Davil moved silently, analyzing the situation with the precision of a machine but letting Naira lead. The group reached the old defense wing. The doors groaned as they opened, creaking from years of disuse. Dust floated, in the low gravity like gray clouds. Inside, rows of consoles sat untouched. Dim emergency lights cast long shadows. The screens were dark, but Naira didn't hesitate. She dropped her bag, pulled out a small drive, and plugged it into one of the panels. The system blinked to life. "This isn't your first time doing. This is it?" asked Vik, his voice quiet now. Naira didn't answer immediately. She moved her fingers across the console, inputting old Earth codes that she'd memorized. They were simple, designed for use in chaos. "My first time was when I was 13, she said at last. A drill turned into something else. My team didn't make it. I did." Silence filled the room for a second, before the console chirped. A map of the academy flashed onto the wall. Small red dots appeared outside the station, ships moving closer. Davil scanned the readings. "If they continue at this speed, they'll begin targeting key energy zones in under 5 minutes. Naira nodded. "We need to reroute power to the old barrier systems on the east side. They were retired, but they're still functional." "Why haven't we used them before?" asked Lenka. "Because they were considered too primitive," Naira replied. "Manual systems. No AI, no voice activation, just buttons and levers. But that's why they'll work when everything else fails." Outside, another low rumble rolled through the station. Students screamed somewhere down the corridor. The sky flickered as shields failed for a moment. A large shadow passed across the academy's main window. The enemy was close enough to see now. Sleek black ships with no visible markings. No one knew who they were. Only that they weren't here to talk. Professor Corlin entered the room, breathing hard. He looked around at the students gathered. His eyes fell on Naira. I don't know how to help," he admitted. "Everything I believed about conflict, I thought it was behind us." Naira stood from the console, her expression firm. "It's never behind us," she said. "It just waits for us to forget." She turned to the group. "If anyone wants to leave, go now. Once this starts, I can't promise safety. But if we hold this station for the next 20 minutes, the fleet won't be able to break through." No one moved. Outside, the shadows grew larger. The battle hadn't begun, but the silence before it had settled. And in that silence, the quiet human was ready. The lights in the old defense wing flickered as another tremor rolled through the walls of Nova Sector Academy. Dust fell from the ceiling like a warning. Naira Solon stood at the center console, her hands moving quickly but calmly across the worn controls. The room smelled faintly of metal and age. Around her, the students who had chosen to stay watched, in silence, unsure if they were more afraid of the attacking fleet or the fact that their survival now rested in the hands of someone they had ignored for months. Zoril, a young shapeshifter who had joined them quietly, was the first to speak. "You really think these old systems will stop warships?" "They won't stop them," Naira answered without looking up. "But they'll slow them down. And slowing them down is the first step in surviving." Her voice was low even without panic. It wasn't a tone of command, but it had the weight of experience. Slowly, the others started to move. Lenka took up a position near the doorway, her long insect arms ready to help where needed. Vik floated toward a side panel, using his tentacles to read the old control symbols. Davil, the android, began scanning and recalibrating the academy's leftover power lines. Even Zoril, unsure of what form to take, chose to stay as he was, a tall, smooth figure with uncertain eyes. The outside world had gone quiet again, the kind of silence that always came just before the first strike. Professor Corlin stood to the side, arms folded, his expression unreadable. For someone who had spent years lecturing about peace and progress, he now found himself relying on the very thing he had dismissed, human instinct for crisis. "Most of you think strength is loud," Naira said as she patched the final wire into the backup core. "But the strongest ones are the ones who stay quiet until it matters." The group watched as the system lights turned from red to green, one by one. Shield lines on the academy map blinked alive. Primitive, yes, but functional. The East Wing now had protection. Not perfect, but better than nothing. The ships outside had reached visual range. On the monitors, black shapes hovered against the stars, still waiting. Their stillness was more frightening than movement. "Why aren't they firing yet?" asked Veek, his glow now pale blue. "They're watching," Naira said. They caught us off guard. But now we've activated defenses. That means they have to reassess. We've shifted the balance even just a little." Zoril tilted his head. "You didn't fire a shot, just turned on old machines. And they're already thinking twice?" "Strategy is about making the enemy doubt their next step," she said. "Even fear silence." The Academy's AI voice returned, its tone glitchy. "Emergency shelters at 40% capacity. Power failure in west section. Evacuation pods offline." Davil looked up from the console. "They've started jamming systems. Communications are blocked." "That's fine," Naira replied. "We don't need to talk to anyone right now." Professor Corlin stepped closer, his eyes narrowed. "You act like you've done this before." "I have," she said plainly. "Earth doesn't wait for peace to break. We're always preparing just in case." A soft beep came from the console. A new reading appeared on the display. One of the enemy ships had broken formation. It was moving lower, closer to the station's gravity field. "That one's scouting," said Naira, testing our response. "What do we do?" asked Lenka, her wings twitching nervously. Naira didn't hesitate. "We don't respond yet. We let them think we're still too confused to fight back. The moment we show our cards, they adjust. Let them wonder what we're hiding." Zoril stepped forward. "What are we hiding?" A faint smile touched Naira's lips for the first time. "Them," she said, nodding at the others. "All of you. They don't expect cooperation from beings who've never worked together. That's our advantage." More lights came alive on the console. Old systems, once left forgotten, were now active. Naira linked power from the Academy's environmental controls to boost one of the smaller energy shields. It wasn't protocol, but it was smart. The ship hovering close to the Academy fired a single warning shot. The blast hit the outer hull near the abandoned labs. The lights dimmed. The building shook. The group inside swayed but held steady. The shields had absorbed most of it. Corlin stared at the display, his eyes wide. "They're not bluffing." "No," Naira said, her voice as steady as ever. "But neither am I." A new figure stepped into the room. Hivya, a scholar bot who specialized in historical ethics, had found her way there. Her glowing eyes scanned the screen. "You are applying a very old method of defense," she said. "Unpredictable, inefficient, and yet it's working," Davil added. For a brief moment the room was quiet again. Not from fear this time, but from the strange realization that things might just hold together. No one had expected this, least of all Naira. But there she stood, guiding aliens, machines, and beings from peaceful worlds into becoming a team. "Keep your focus," she said. "We've bought ourselves minutes. That's more than we had before." And with every passing second, silence became more than just the absence of sound. It became a strategy, a weapon, a shield. Naira didn't shout. She didn't run. She led by doing, by understanding, and by turning chaos into order, with the smallest, most deliberate choices. The next attack would come, but when it did, they wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. The second attack came faster than the first. A focused energy blast slammed into the station's outer barrier with a deep, vibrating hum that echoed through the walls like a warning drum. Dust fell from the ceilings again, and the lights flickered once more. But this time, no one screamed. No one ran. Inside the old war simulation room, the group that had once been a scattered collection of nervous students now worked like a unit. They weren't trained soldiers, but they had followed one. Naira Solon stood at the console, eyes focused, movements precise. She didn't speak unless she had to. A glance, a hand gesture, a single word. She communicated like someone who had learned long ago that clarity mattered more than noise. Around her, the others responded quickly. Lenka was monitoring the backup shields. Veek kept the internal gravity fields balanced. Davil was rerouting broken connections and Zoril handled hallway sensors with surprising skill. Even Hivya, the scholar bot who once believed action belonged only to history books, was now tracking the enemy ship's rotation patterns and calculating angles of fire. Outside, the enemy ships hovered in place, almost curious. Whoever they were, they hadn't expected resistance, not from a school, and certainly not from a group led by a quiet human girl. The attackers had begun to shift formation, drawing into a triangle that pointed directly at the Academy's command tower. They were preparing for a final strike. "They're going for the heart," Naira said, breaking the silence. "They think taking out the tower will shut everything down." Corlin stood by the doorway, still watching. He hadn't spoken much since realizing the value of what he once called primitive thinking. His face, normally full of pride, was now tight with concern. "Can we stop it?" he asked. "We can slow it," Naira said, "and maybe make them think twice." She leaned over the console and activated a final program, one that had been built for demonstration only. It simulated a wide-area counterattack using outdated projectile systems. No one had ever armed it. But Earth cadets trained for things like this. She had hidden 3 homemade charge packs in her emergency bag on day 1. Not for violence, just for readiness. She connected the charges to the simulation system and gave the order to load. Davil watched in silent admiration. "This isn't taught in any academy," he said. "No," Naira replied, "but it should be." The enemy fired again. This time the blast broke through a shield wall. Fire sparked along the upper floor, and part of the sky bridge collapsed. But the academy still stood. Somehow it still held. The group braced as the tremor passed. Everyone looked to Naira. She didn't look nervous, she looked ready. She turned to the team. "We launch the counter signal the moment the lead ship reaches the upper range limit. Not before. If we're lucky they think we're stronger than we are, they hesitate. That gives the rest of the station time to evacuate." Zoril nodded. "And if they don't hesitate? Then we make it hard for them." As the enemy fleet drew closer, Naira activated the defense simulation. The projectors outside the academy lit up. Old cannons rose from hidden hatches. They weren't real weapons, just clever illusions combined with electromagnetic pulses to confuse scanners. But to someone watching from a distance, they looked real enough. The lead ship paused, then, slowly, it began to shift direction. "They're not firing," Lenka whispered. "They're thinking," Naira said. Another moment passed. Then the enemy ships turned, just slightly, not retreating but no longer advancing either. Naira sent out one last signal, a coded broadcast meant for nearby patrols. Short, direct, unmistakably human. It read, "Academy under attack. Delay. Successful. Send aid now." The lights inside the station steadied. Outside, the ships remained still, watching. And inside the defense room, silence returned. But it was a different silence now. Not the silence of fear. The silence of success. "Professor." Corlin stepped forward. "I misjudged you," he said softly. "I misjudged your people." Naira looked at him, her expression still calm. "A lot of species do," she replied, "until they see what silence really means to us." Hivya turned from her station. "You've saved the academy. You saved us." "No," Naira said, shaking her head. "We did it together. That's the part no one expected." The emergency broadcast echoed again through the halls. This time, it was different. A voice from a nearby patrol ship responded. Help was on the way. For the first time, the academy's future looked safe. Naira moved toward the doorway. Her job, for now, was done. She didn't smile or celebrate. She simply walked, steady and quiet, as she always had. As she left, Zoril turned to Corlin. "Do you think she'll stay?" Corlin nodded slowly. "I hope she teaches." Outside, the fleet drifted back into the shadows, and a new story was born, one that would be told for years across the stars. The story of the quiet storm, and the human who reminded the galaxy that silence when guided by strength could shake worlds.